True wealth is not found in the gold you hoard, but in the truth you dare to uncover when the surface of your inherited reality finally cracks. Most people spend their entire lives investing in a version of reality that was handed to them like a pre-packaged portfolio. They taught you to believe. They handed you verses, rules, and traditions. But no one warned you what would happen when the market of your soul crashes. What if the version of Christianity you inherited is only a fraction of the truth? What if behind the polished sermons and predictable answers, there is a raw, unfiltered history that changes your entire net worth of purpose? This is not a conspiracy or a rejection, but a deeper layer of spiritual equity. It is a layer that demands honesty, discomfort, and a kind of courage most people were never told they would need to follow Jesus. Because once you see the hidden foundations, you cannot unsee them. And the question becomes, will you keep walking like nothing happened, or dare to go further into the deep? The story of faith is often told through a lens of selective storytelling. We grow up hearing about miracles and certainties, but the hidden side of this history is far more human and challenging. Faith did not begin in a boardroom of certainty. It began in confusion, risk, and the kind of uncomfortable obedience that would terrify a modern investor. Jesus did not surround himself with spiritually polished or financially stable elite. He chose fishermen with tempers and tax collectors with questionable integrity. He invested in flawed hearts rather than perfected ones. As the early movement grew, it was not a smooth upward curve. It was marked by disagreement, tension, and long seasons of waiting where heaven felt quiet. Christianity spread through extreme sacrifice rather than comfort, where people walked away from stability with no promise of an earthly return. But as time passed, the fire of conviction often turned. Into the habit of tradition. The movement became an institution, and the message was sometimes edited by fear and the desire for control. Yet the invitation remains hidden in plain sight, asking if you are following a system or a living truth. Before we peel back the layers of this ancient ledger to see what has been hidden from your spiritual balance sheet, we must pause. What you are about to hear might devalue the comfortable illusions you've held for decades, but in the economy of the soul, a crash is often the only way to find the true bottom. If you are ready to look at the foundations that were never discussed in the light of day, then you are ready for what comes next. Welcome to the channel, The Upside Down Life. To understand the appearance of thought, we must first look at the anatomy of selective storytelling. In the world of finance, we understand that a balance sheet only tells part of the story. It shows the assets and the liabilities, but it rarely shows the blood, sweat, and tears that went into the production of value. The history of Christianity has been treated much like a corporate annual report. The successes are highlighted, the miracles are celebrated, and the growth is charted in a way that suggests a steady, inevitable rise to power. But as a philosopher who has watched the cycles of human belief for 50 years, I can tell you that the most important data points are often found in the margins. The surface of our belief systems is often just a thin veneer of tradition. In the world of philosophy and finance, we call this the face value, but the intrinsic value lies beneath the surface. When the foundations crack, it is not a sign of failure, but an invitation to audit the truth. Many people feel like their faith is failing because they have doubts or moments of weakness. They feel like they are poor in spirit because they cannot maintain the performance of perfection. But the reality is that God has always moved in messy spaces. The original investment of the divine was made in the most volatile of human assets. Think about the disciples from a management perspective. They were a disaster. You had Peter, who was prone to emotional outbursts and impulsive decisions. You had tax collectors, who were essentially the social outcasts of their economic system. You had followers who struggled to understand the core mission even after years of direct mentorship. This was not a polished team of professionals. This was a group of high-risk individuals. Yet, this is exactly where the power lies. True wealth in the kingdom of God is not about perfected performance, but about honest surrender. When we leave out the struggle and replace it with performance, we are trading a living asset for a dead ritual. The early church in the book of Acts gives us a glimpse into what I call spiritual venture capital. There was no guaranteed return. There was no financial security or passive income system to protect the believers. There was only conviction. They walked away from careers and stability because they had found a connection that outweighed their fear. In modern terms, they went all in on an invisible market. They understood that faith was not an accessory to life, but the axis upon which everything else turned. If your faith feels like a burden or a pressure, it is likely because you have inherited a version that has been stripped of its risk and its raw humanity. We must also consider the process of how sacred truth was preserved for centuries. People assume the Bible arrived as a finished product, untouched and final. But history shows a more complicated and beautiful process of due diligence. The early followers held fragments, letters, and memories. Faith moved faster than structure. This tells us that the Spirit is not bound by the systems we create to contain it. The process of forming Scripture involved debate, prayer, and even human politics. Leaders argued and voted. This does not weaken the authority of the Word, but rather deepens it. It shows that God trusted humanity with the responsibility of discernment. He did not bypass the human process. He entered it. This is a profound realization for anyone who struggles with doubt. If the very foundation of Scripture was shaped through careful questioning and testing, then your questions are not a threat to your belief. They are a participation in the same process that shaped the faith itself. You are not failing the test. You are refining the asset. The core message of loving your enemies and laying down your life has survived across persecution and exile because its value is independent of the systems that try to claim it. However, a turning point occurred when Christianity stopped being a hunted movement and started being invited into the halls of power. In the language of economics, this was a massive merger. The cross, once a symbol of execution and sacrifice, became a symbol of authority and policy. While this brought protection, it also introduced the risk of control when faith interacts with political influence. The question often shifts from what is true to what is useful. This is where the selective storytelling became a tool for stability. Unity was enforced rather than discerned. Disagreement, which was once a catalyst for growth, was suddenly seen as a threat to the institution. We must ask ourselves how often we confuse stability with faithfulness. We cling to systems because they feel safe, even when they no longer feel alive. The early believers did not have buildings or titles. They had fire, and fire is a difficult asset to manage inside polished walls. When power enters the room, God does not necessarily leave, but he begins to call individuals back to the heart of the message. He calls us away from preserving comfort and back to the risk of following. The voices that were silenced throughout history are like the lost innovations of a suppressed market. Many of these movements emphasized inner transformation and direct spiritual intimacy. They were dangerous to the hierarchy because they could not be controlled. They warned against wealth replacing devotion and power, replacing service. Today, we are still comfortable with a faith that fits into our schedules and expectations. But a faith that demands interchange feels invasive. We must have the courage to ask how many truths feel unorthodox simply because they do not benefit the system we are used to. As faith became a habit rather than a fire, it became familiar and predictable. This is the inflation of belief, when words are spoken without weight and rituals are performed without reflection. The value of the faith depreciates. Jesus warned about lips that honor God while hearts remain distant. He was exposing the emptiness of religious performance. If you feel a sense of spiritual exhaustion, it may be because You are trying to maintain a habit rather than a relationship. Connection must replace routine for the fire to return. The greatest battles of the Christian journey are internal. They happen in the private space where your belief collides with your ego and your desire for control. The Apostle Paul was honest about this inner struggle. He did not present it as a weakness, but as evidence of engagement. Growth happens through tension. If you are managing your behavior instead of confronting your desires, you are only working on the surface. While not. True transformation requires an internal alignment that goes beyond external performance. Been a powerful editor of the truth. It trims and softens the message until it feels safe to live with. But the message of Jesus was never designed for safety. It was designed for bravery. When fear loosens its grip, the message regains its original weight. You begin to see that faith is not something you guard like a secret treasure, but something you like a bold investment. The version of Christianity that survived outside the spotlight, it is the one that truly endured. In homes, fields, and prisons, ordinary people lived out their belief. Without the need for recognition, this resilient faith suggests that the most authentic expressions of truth are often the least visible. It challenges our modern metrics of success. If everything external was stripped away, would your faith survive? This question is meant to clarify what is real. Christianity did not survive because it was powerful in a worldly sense. It survived because it was personal. When belief shifts from something discovered to something inherited, it can lose its intention. Inheriting a faith is like inheriting a business you do not understand. You might know the terminology, but you do not know the cost of the original investment. Borrowed faith struggles to hold weight during times of suffering. We must move from inheriting belief to owning it through experience and reflection. Every generation must rediscover the truth for themselves. Knowing the truth that you cannot unsee comes with a cost. It brings a responsibility that many people instinctively resist. Once you recognize how the message has been filtered, you can no longer casually consume it. It starts to interfere with how you spend your time, how you forgive your enemies, and how you prioritize your life. Jesus warned us to count the cost because he wanted us to follow with open eyes. Deeper faith means fewer shortcuts. It means accepting that your decisions will be shaped by something eternal rather than something temporary. The hidden side of Christianity is not a secret society. It is an invitation to become someone transformed. It is an invitation to align your life with a reality that is more real than the one you see on the news or in your bank account. Belief must move from a concept to a commitment. If the noise and the tradition were stripped away, would you still want the transformation? The story never ended because individuals continue to answer that invitation. True faith begins when we dare to ask if there is more depth and more truth than we were ever shown. The real danger was never in what they did not tell you. It was in believing that there was nothing more to find. The truth is not fragile, and it does not need to be protected from your questions. It only asks that you do not stop seeking once your curiosity has been stirred. As we move from the surface of these inherited thoughts into the deeper mechanics of how truth is often obscured by the shadows of power, we must prepare ourselves for a different kind of sight. The transition from understanding the appearance of thought to analyzing the hidden mechanics of influence is like moving from observing the market to understanding the forces that drive it. We have seen the face of the institution, but now we must look at the shadows it casts. In the next part of our journey, we will explore the dialectic of the shadow, where we examine how the very structures meant to preserve the light can sometimes become the source of darkness. We will look at the specific ways in which the message was edited to serve the interests of the few, and how you can reclaim the original capital of your conviction. To understand the shadow of the truth, we must first dare to look at the cracks in the foundation of everything we were told to value. If the version of Christianity you inherited is only a fraction of the reality, then it is highly likely that the version of financial success you were sold is also a hollow shell. We live in a world of selective storytelling where the history of faith and the history of wealth are scrubbed clean of their messiness to keep the masses obedient and predictable. In the United States, we see this played out from the stained glass windows of the South to the glass towers of Wall Street. They taught you that faith is about certainty and that wealth is about a steady paycheck. But both of these are illusions designed to prevent you from seeing the raw and unfiltered truth. What if the silence of heaven that many believers fear is actually the same silence found in a crashing market where only the courageous dare to act? The hidden side of Christianity is human and messy. Just as the path to true financial freedom is filled with uncomfortable risks that no one warned you about in school. Think about the fishermen and the tax collectors that Jesus chose to build his movement. These were not people with polished resumes or high credit scores. They were individuals with tempers and questionable integrity who were operating on the fringes of the Roman economy. In modern terms, these would be the high-risk entrepreneurs and the social outcasts. The early church did not grow through smooth transitions or quarterly growth reports. It grew through disagreement, tension, and long seasons of waiting without any clarity from the top. This is the same psychological battle faced by a visionary who invests their last dollar. What do you do when heaven feels quiet and your bank account feels empty? Most people retreat into the safety of tradition or the comfort of a cubicle, but the hidden foundation of faith and wealth is not found in comfort. It is found in sacrifice. The early followers walked away from stability and personal safety with no promise of an earthly return. They did not have passive income or a diversified portfolio. They had conviction, which is the ultimate currency of the soul. If you have ever felt like your faith was not working, it might be because you are trying to follow an edited version of the truth. The edited version leaves out the struggle and replaces it with a performance of piety or a performance of business. But God and the laws of the universe move in messy spaces. In America today, we are told that the American dream is a linear path of education, debt, and retirement at 65. This is the financial equivalent of a polished sermon that avoids the reality of the cross. It is a system of control that relies on your fear. When the early followers held fragments of letters and scrolls by candlelight, they were not looking for a bound book of rules. They were looking for a way to survive in a world that wanted to erase them. The process of shaping scripture was not an automated miracle. It was a gritty process of debate, human judgment, and political pressure. Leaders prayed and argued, and sometimes they voted on what was sacred. This reveals a profound truth that applies to your money as much as your soul. The Spirit works through human responsibility. If you are not questioning the systems you belong to, you are not participating in the process of truth. You are merely a consumer of someone else's edited reality. The power of the core message survived persecution and exile because it was tested by fire. In the same way, a wealth strategy that has never seen a recession is not a strategy. It is just luck. True belief and true financial sovereignty are refined through the moments when everything seems to be falling apart. There was a moment in history when the cross stopped being a symbol of execution and became a symbol of authority in the halls of power. When Christianity was invited into the political structures of Rome, it gained protection, but it lost its edge. The question changed from, is this true, to, is this useful for the empire? We see this same shift in our modern economy. What started as a movement of innovation and freedom often becomes a bureaucracy of control and regulation. When faith or finance becomes institutionalized, it starts to prioritize stability over faithfulness and profit over people. We often confuse a stable system with a healthy one. But fire does not survive long inside polished walls. The turning point for your life comes when you realize that the institution is not there to save you, whether it is a religious institution or a financial one. Its primary goal is its own preservation. God stayed with the church when power entered the room, but he began calling individuals back to the heart of the message. He calls you to look at the voices that were silenced because they were inconvenient to the hierarchy. In the history of faith, those who spoke of direct spiritual intimacy without a middleman were often labeled as dangerous. In the history of money, those who speak of true decentralization and self-sovereignty are also seen as a threat to the status quo. Hierarchy reacts when its control is threatened by personal transformation. Many truths feel unorthodox simply because they do not benefit the system we are used to. Discernment requires the courage to be an outsider even when you are standing inside the building. When belief becomes a habit instead of a fire, it loses its power to change the world. People learn how to practice faith without feeling it, just as they learn how to earn money without understanding its value. Repetition has a way of dulling the wonder of existence. Jesus warned about lips that honor God while hearts remain distant, which is the spiritual equivalent of a hollow economy built on debt and empty promises. If your faith or your work feels like a checkbox rather than a confrontation with reality, you are experiencing slow erosion of the soul. Exhaustion often comes not from hard work, but from performing a version of yourself that is not real. The greatest battles are never external. They happen in the private space where your desire for security collides with your calling to be great. The Apostle Paul spoke of the internal pull in opposite directions. This is the same tension felt by an investor who knows they should buy when others are fearful but finds their own hands shaking. Growth happens through this tension, not by avoiding it. Maintaining a facade of strength while suppressing doubt is the fastest way to fracture your identity. The more honest your faith and your financial goals become, the less exhausting they feel. Fear is a powerful editor that trims the radical parts of the message to make them safer for the public. Fear of loss and fear of uncertainty have shrunk the bold ideas of the gospel into manageable routines. Jesus never preached safety as a goal. He spoke about losing your life to find it, which is the ultimate contrarian investment. If you are avoiding parts of your life because they feel too risky, you are letting fear rewrite your story. Practicality and tradition are often just masks that fear wears to keep you small. Christianity was meant to make you braver, not more comfortable. When you look at the faith that survived outside the spotlight, you see a resilience that does not need permission to exist. In ordinary homes and hidden fields, people lived out a truth that did not make headlines. They loved when it made no sense, and they forgave. This underground resilience is the true measure of belief, and it is also the true measure of a person's character. Authentic expression often grows best without applause. If everything external was stripped away from you tomorrow, your titles, your bank balance, and your social standing, what would remain? Would your faith and your sense of self survive without reinforcement? This question is meant to clarify what is real in a world of shadows. Christianity survived because it was personal and adaptable, not because it was powerful. The same is true for the principles of wealth. The systems may fail, but the individual who understands value and connection will always find a way. At some point, belief stopped being a decision and started being an inheritance. People are born into religions, economic classes long before they understand the cost of either. Inheritance can be a gift, but it can also remove the need for intention. When you say you believe something just because it is familiar, you are living on borrowed time. Familiarity replaces curiosity. With a fragile certainty that breaks when life gets hard, Jesus did not invite people to inherit a tradition. He invited them to follow a path. Following requires movement and sacrifice, while inheriting requires nothing. If your faith or your financial status has never been tested, it has never been strengthened, if everything you were taught disappeared, what would you still hold on to as truth? The answer to that question reveals whether your life is internal or just a reflection of your surroundings. Once you see the pattern of how the truth has been softened, you cannot unsee it. There is a cost to knowing what is hidden behind the polished surface. Responsibility is often more frightening than the truth itself because it demands a response. Knowing changes your expectations and removes the safety of your ignorance. A deeper faith and a deeper understanding of wealth will interfere with how you live and how you spend. This interference is the beginning of your freedom. Jesus spoke about counting the cost because he wanted his followers to have their eyes wide open. He did not sell a convenient lie. Modern believers often feel a tension because they sense something deeper but are afraid to step into it. Deeper surrender means fewer shortcuts and less reliance on the approval of the crowd. If your beliefs stopped being theoretical and became fully applied today, your habits and your fears would be challenged immediately. Christianity does not ask for your perfection. It asks for your awareness of the reality you are participating in. The invitation is hidden in plain sight, waiting for those who are willing to look beyond appearances. It is not an invitation to join a system, but to become a transformed human being. Jesus used parables to confuse those who wanted easy answers and to reveal depth to those who were hungry for truth. You either step forward or you stay exactly where you are. The hidden side of the story is found in the moment you realize that faith is something to be embodied, not just analyzed. It moves from a concept in your head to a commitment in your heart. If the noise and the tradition were gone, would you still want the message for who it invites you to become? The story did not end with the ancient manuscripts. It continues every time an individual chooses to answer the call to live differently. True faith begins when you dare to ask if there is more than what you were shown. There is more depth, more tension, and more truth waiting for those who are honest enough to see it. The danger was never in what they did not tell you. The danger was in you believing that there was nothing left to discover about your own. The truth is not fragile, and it does not need to be protected from your honest questions. It only asks that you do not stop seeking once your curiosity has been awakened. If you find yourself standing at the edge of a new understanding, do not be afraid of the height. The descent into the deeper layers of reality is where you find the solid ground that the world cannot shake. In the United States, we are obsessed with the visible markers of success. But the invisible markers of the soul are what carry us through the night. The shadow of the truth is not a dark place. It is simply the part of the light that we have not yet learned to face. As we move forward, remember that every system of control is built on the assumption that you will never look behind the curtain. But once you look, the power of the illusion is broken forever. The path ahead is not about finding more answers, but about becoming the kind of person who can live with the questions. This is the essence of the upside-down life where the last are first, and the hidden is finally revealed. The connection between your spirit and your resources is the ultimate frontier of your development. Do not let the selective storytelling of others define the limits of your journey. There is a raw and unfiltered history waiting to be written. By your own choices and your own courage, the quiet tension you feel is the signal that you are getting closer to the heart of the matter. The surface has cracked, and what lies beneath is far more challenging and far more beautiful than you were prepared for. As we prepare to transition into the next layer of this exploration, consider how the laws of cause and effect have brought you to this exact moment of realization. The logic of the universe is consistent, and it rewards those who align themselves with fundamental truth. The next step is to understand how these hidden foundations are not just obstacles, but the very tools you need to build a life of lasting impact. We will now examine the light of the laws that govern both the spiritual and the material realms, showing how consequences shape the world we see. The logic of the early church was not an accident of history or a stroke of mere luck. It followed the immutable law of compounding conviction. When we examine the foundations of any great endeavor, whether it is a global faith or an empire, we find the same pattern. The growth of Christianity was rooted in the law of initial risk. Jesus did not recruit from the established elite of Jerusalem. He did not seek out those with high social capital or secured assets. He chose fishermen and tax collectors. In modern terms, he was investing in undervalued human capital. He saw potential where the market of that time saw only common labor or moral bankruptcy. This is the first great lesson of spiritual and financial wealth. True value is often hidden in messy spaces. If you only invest in what is already beautiful and finished, you have already missed the greatest window of growth. The early followers had to walk away from their existing stability. They understood the principle of opportunity cost. To gain the kingdom, they had to liquidate. In the United States today, we see the remnants of this radical mindset in the very architecture of our society. The pioneers who built the foundations of the West often operated on this same frequency of sacrifice. They moved toward the unknown with no promise of return. They were not looking for passive income or comfortable retirement. They were looking for a transformation of the world. This reveals a profound law of the universe. Power follows purpose, not the other way around. When the purpose is deep and unshakable, resources align. But when the purpose becomes secondary to the preservation of the resources, the decline begins. The history we read in the book of Acts shows a movement that was lean and agile. It was a startup of the soul. Decisions were made through prayer and fasting, a form of diligence. They were waiting for clarity before committing their lives. This waiting was not passive. It was a strategic alignment with a higher frequency. In our modern world of high frequency, trading, and instant gratification, we have forgotten the power of the long pause. We have forgotten that silence is often where the most significant data is processed. The quietness of heaven that many believers fear is actually a test of spiritual endurance. It is the ultimate stress test for the heart. If your faith only works when the market is up, and the answers are clear, then you do not have faith. You have a fair weather contract. True conviction is the equity you hold when the world is silent and the returns are invisible. This is how the message survived the fragments and the scrolls. The truth was not preserved by a central bank of information. It was diversified across a network of fragile vessels. This is the principle of decentralization. By spreading the message through letters, testimonies, and oral traditions, the core truth became impossible to erase. If you destroy one center, the fire continues in a dozen other places. This is the same logic used by the most resilient economic systems today. Resilience comes from the lack of a single point of failure. God trusted humanity with the responsibility of discernment. He did not bypass the human process. He entered it. This is the ultimate divine investment. He placed his most valuable asset, the truth, into the hands of flawed and unpredictable humans. This teaches us that perfection is not a prerequisite for participation in a great work in the world of finance. We often wait for the perfect conditions before we act. We wait for the perfect plan or the perfect partner. But the history of faith shows us that God moves in the mess. He calls people forward before they have full understanding. This is the law of active engagement. Clarity is a reward for movement. not a requirement for it. When you start walking, the path reveals itself. If you stay seated waiting for a map, you will die in the chair. The spread of Christianity across the Roman Empire was a masterclass in organic scaling. It did not happen through a massive marketing budget or political lobbying. It happened through the viral nature of a transformed life. When a person is truly changed, they become a walking advertisement for the source of that change. This is the most potent marketing. It is the word of mouth that carries the weight of a life lived differently. In the centuries that followed, we see the inevitable meeting of faith and authority. This was a moment of massive capital infusion when the Roman Emperor Constantine opened the doors to the church. The movement gained immense social and political liquidity, but with that liquidity came the risk of inflation. When something becomes easy to join, the value of membership begins to drop. The cost of entry was no longer a life of sacrifice. It was simply a profession. This is the danger of institutionalization. The structure becomes more important than the spirit that built the house. In the United States, we see this in our massive corporations and our aging institutions. They have the buildings and the titles, but often they have lost. The fire of the founders. They are managing an inheritance rather than pursuing a vision. The logic of the positive dialectic tells us that this is a natural cycle. Growth leads to structure, and structure eventually leads to stagnation, unless there is a constant return. The silenced voices that were mentioned in the history were often the ones trying to protect the original value. They were the whistleblowers of the soul. They saw the wealth of the church growing while the spiritual health was declining. They warned that wealth was replacing. In any economic system, when the symbol of value becomes more important than the value itself, a crash is coming. The rituals and the habits are the symbols. The inner transformation is the actual value. If you have the ritual without the transformation, you are holding a currency that has no backing. It is spiritual fiat. It looks like money, but it has no purchasing power in the realm of the spirit. The resilience of the underground faith proves that true wealth cannot be confiscated. You can take a man's career and his stability, but you cannot take a conviction that is woven into his identity. This is the ultimate form of asset protection. When your value is internal, you are immune to the fluctuations of the external world. The early believers lived with a sense of divine connection. This connection was their primary asset. Everything else was just a tool to be used or discarded. As we look at the way belief became inherited, we see the transition from active management to passive holding. Inherited faith is like an inherited fortune. If the one who receives it does not understand the work it took to create it, they will likely lose it. They will not know how to defend it when the market turns. They will not know how to grow it when the conditions change. This is why every generation must rediscover the truth for themselves. You cannot live on the interest of your grandfather's prayers. You must make your own deposits of sacrifice and obedience. The cost of knowing what you cannot unsee is high. It demands a total reallocation of your life's resources. Once you see the depth of the invitation, you can no longer be satisfied with a superficial life. You have to count the cost. You have to decide if the return is worth the investment. Jesus was very clear about this. He told his followers to calculate the expenses before building. He was a philosopher of the long view. He was not offering a quick fix or a short-term gain. He was offering an eternal equity. This logic applies to every area of our lives, whether we are building a family, a business, or a soul. The foundations must be deep. The materials must be tested by fire, and the owner must be fully committed to the process. The hidden side of Christianity is not a secret to be solved. It is a reality to be lived. It is the realization that the most important things in life are unmeasurable, and yet they are the very things that give the balance sheet its meaning. Without the fire of conviction, The most polished life is just an empty shell. But with that fire, even the most broken life becomes a source of infinite light. This light has traveled through the dark corners of history. It has survived the silence of the archives and the noise of the cathedrals. It is a light that continues to invite us to step out of the shadows of habit and into the warmth of a living truth. As we move forward from the laws of the past into the application for the present, we must ask ourselves a difficult question. Are we building on the rock of personal experience or the sand of inherited tradition? The answer to that question will determine how we stand when the storm. The laws of history are clear, but the choices of the future are ours to make. We must look closely at the patterns of those who came before us to understand the trajectory of where we are headed next. The transition from understanding history to living reality is where the abstract becomes concrete and where the spiritual meets the material. We have spent decades looking at faith as a set of rules or a series of historical events, but we rarely discuss how these foundations dictate the very way we handle our resources. The early followers of Jesus did not just change their prayers, they changed their entire economic relationship with the world. They moved from a mindset of scarcity and protection to a mindset of radical investment and sacrifice. In the modern world, we separate our lives, believing that one is sacred and the other is secular. But if you look closely at the hidden foundations we have discussed, you will see that true wealth is never found in the polished surface of a bank account, but in the resilient fire of a soul that knows. We are taught to seek stability as the ultimate goal of our careers and our investments. We want the promise of a guaranteed return, a passive income that requires no risk, and a system that protects us from the volatility of the world. Yet history shows otherwise. Stability is often the enemy of growth. When Christianity became legal and institutionalized, it gained protection but lost its transformative edge. In the same way, when your personal economy becomes too focused on comfort and safety, you lose the ability to innovate and lead. You begin to manage your behavior instead of confronting your desires. You start to follow the herd because the herd feels safe, even when the herd is walking toward a cliff. To apply these philosophical truths to your daily life, you must learn to read the price of your own soul. In the financial markets, price action is the raw movement of value before the news and the analysts try to explain it. It is the unfiltered truth of what people actually believe, not what they say they believe. Your life has its own price action. Where do you actually spend your energy when no one is watching? What do you sacrifice for when the stakes are high? The hidden foundation of Christianity was never flawless belief. It was honest surrender. In financial terms, this means surrendering the illusion of control. Most people fail in the pursuit of wealth because they are trying to control variables that are inherently uncontrollable. They react to the noise of the news, the fluctuations of the market, and the opinions of the crowd. They are like the religious leaders Jesus challenged. People who mastered the law but missed the essence of love and service. They mastered the mechanics of money, but missed the philosophy of value. Value is not something you take from the world. It is something you provide to it through your unique conviction and willingness. The early church grew in the middle of disagreement and tension. Because they were not afraid of the mess, they did not wait for perfect clarity before they moved forward. If you are waiting for the perfect economic climate to start your business, you are waiting for an edited version of reality. Real wealth is built in the silence where others are waiting for answers. It is built through uncomfortable obedience to a vision that others cannot see. Think about the tax collectors and the fishermen who left everything they had. A conviction that outweighed their fear. This does not mean you should be reckless with your finances, but it means you must recognize that your greatest asset is not your money. It is your courage. If you strip away the recognition, the structure, and the approval, what remains of your value? If the entire financial system as we know it, were to shift tomorrow, would your internal fire still burn? This is the difference between inherited wealth and internal wealth. Inherited wealth is fragile because it was never tested. It is weak. Internal wealth is resilient because it was forged in the inner battle that no one warned you about. We live in a culture that confuses price with value. We think that because an asset has a high price, it has a high value, but history shows inflation. Prices are often inflated by fear and greed. True value is found in the things that survive when the spotlight is turned off. It is found in the quiet strength of individuals who refuse to let their fire die. When you start to view your life through this lens, faith stops feeling like pressure and starts feeling like permission. It is permission to be honest about your doubts while still moving forward. It is permission to fail without being a failure. In the marketplace, this translates to a long-term perspective while others chase the quick gain and the immediate gratification. You are building on a foundation that is hidden. You are investing in relationships, in character, and in truth. These are the assets that do not depreciate. These are the investments that carry you when life breaks open. The quiet turning point in any journey is when you realize that you are responsible for the truth you have seen. Once you see that the systems of the world are often built on selective storytelling and enforced unity, you cannot go back to being a consumer. You must become an active participant in your own evolution. This requires a shift from being a follower of tradition to being a seeker of truth. It means looking at your bank statement, not just as a record of transactions, but as a reflection of your priorities. Every dollar you spend is a vote for the kind of world you want to live in. Every hour you invest is a statement of what you truly value. If your faith and your finances are not aligned, you will experience a hollow feeling, a spiritual exhaustion that success cannot heal. This is because you are trying to maintain a habit without engaging a relationship. You are practicing a form of life without the power of it. The hidden strength of the underground faith was its ability to adapt and endure without institutional support. In your own life, you must build a personal economy that is decentralized from the approval of others. You must have a source of value that does not depend on the fluctuating opinions of the crowd. This is how you become truly wealthy, not by accumulation, but by becoming more of who you were invited to be. The message of Jesus was disruptive because it could not be controlled by the hierarchies of the time. Your own growth will be disruptive to the parts of your life that have become too comfortable and predictable. It will challenge your ego and your need for status. But on the other side of that disruption is a freedom that most people never experience. It is the freedom of knowing that you are walking a path that is chosen, not just inherited. As we look at reality, we see a lot of noise and a lot of fear. We see people clinging to old systems because they feel safe, even as those systems begin to crack. But for those with ears to hear, there is a different invitation. It is an invitation to look beneath the surface and find the foundations that cannot be shaken. It is an invitation to build a life on honesty, sacrifice, and deep trust. This is not a theoretical exercise. It is a daily practice of alignment. It is choosing to forgive when it costs you. It is choosing to give when you are afraid. It is choosing to speak the truth when it is inconvenient. This is how the fire of the early movement is kept alive today. It is not kept alive in buildings or in doctrines, but in the hearts of individuals who are brave enough to respond. Your financial health and your spiritual health are two sides of the same coin. They both require discernment, courage, and a commitment to the long term. Do not be fooled by the polished sermons of the world that promise easy success without struggle. The truth is much more challenging and much more rewarding than that. It demands everything, but it gives back something that money cannot buy. It gives you a sense of purpose that is rooted in eternity. It gives you a resilience that can withstand any storm and clarity. It allows you to see the world as it truly is, not as you wish it to be, as you move through your day. Ask yourself if you are guarding a habit or living a conviction. Ask yourself if your investments are building a cage of comfort or a platform for change. The hidden foundations are there, waiting for you to build upon them. They are not dark or forbidden. They are simply waiting for someone honest enough to see them. The cost of knowing is high, but the cost of staying blind is much higher. You have been given sight, a glimpse behind the curtain. And now the question is what you will do with that sight. Will you keep walking like nothing happened? Or will you dare to go further into the raw and unfiltered reality of a life fully lived? The journey does not end now. It begins with application. It begins when the truths you have heard start to shape the way you breathe, the way you work, and the way you love. This is the moment where the story becomes yours. It is the moment where you stop reading history and start making. The embers of that original fire are still burning, and they are looking for a place to catch. Let your life be that place. Let your choices be the fuel that turns those whispers into a flame. There is a profound weight in realizing that your existence is part of a much larger, much older story of resilience and truth. And as we move toward the final convergence of these ideas, we must prepare ourselves for the ultimate realization of what it means to be truly awake in a world that is still sleeping. Everything leads to this single point of convergence. The history of faith and the history of wealth are not two separate stories. They are the same story of human desire, risk, and the search for ultimate value. You have seen how the foundations of belief were hidden beneath comfort. Now, you must see how your own life is built on those same quiet tensions. True prosperity is never found in the polished surface of things. It is found in the raw, unfiltered truth of your own internal alignment. In the world of finance, we speak of assets, but the greatest liability you will ever carry is a borrowed conviction. An inherited faith is like a debt you can never repay because the interest is your own soul. You were told that safety is the goal of a good life. You were told that stability is the mark of success. But the early followers of Jesus knew a different math. They knew that the only way to find life was to lose it, in modern terms. They were the ultimate venture capitalists of the spirit. They did not invest in what was visible. They invested in a kingdom that the world could not see. They traded the temporary security of the Roman Empire for an eternal equity. When Christianity moved from the catacombs to the palaces, it gained capital but lost its leverage. It became an institution of control. It managed people instead of a movement that transformed them. This is the same trap that catches every person who pursues wealth without wisdom. You build a structure to protect your gains, and eventually the structure becomes your prison. You stop taking risks now because you have too much to lose. You stop asking hard questions because the answers might disrupt your comfort. The fire that once drove you is replaced by the maintenance of a habit. This is why so many people feel hollow, even when their bank accounts are full. They are practicing a faith that costs them nothing and building a life that means nothing. But there is a way back to the heart of the message. It begins with the courage to face the inner battle that no one warned you about. The market of the soul is the most volatile market in existence. It is where your ego competes with your calling. It is where your fear of scarcity fights against your belief in abundance. If you want to build a legacy that lasts, you must look at foundations. Are you following a system because it is safe, or are you following a truth because it is real? God has always moved in the messy spaces of human history. He does not wait for you to have a perfect balance sheet before he calls you forward. He calls In the middle of your doubts, your debts, and your contradictions, he invites you to stop performing and start surrendering. This is the ultimate financial philosophy. Surrender is not a loss of power, it is a transfer of authority. When you stop trying to control, you gain access to a different kind of resource. You begin to see opportunities where others see obstacles. You begin to find peace where others find panic. The hidden side of Christianity is the realization rich, not because of what you are already rich, not because of what you own, but because of who owns you. Once you see this, the pressure to conform disappears. The need to impress the world is replaced by the permission to heal. You no longer work for a paycheck, you work for a purpose. You no longer pray for a result. This is the point where faith stops being a habit and becomes a fire again. It is the moment you realize that the truth was never fragile. It survived persecution, it survived power, and it survived silence. And now, it is waiting to survive your own distractions. The story of the upside-down life is the story of turning your values right side up. It is about choosing the difficult path because it leads to the only destination that matters. It is about building a wealth that cannot be taxed, stolen, or inflated. A wealth of character, a wealth of truth, and a wealth of divine presence. You cannot unsee what you have heard today. You can ignore it, or you can dare to go further. The invitation is hidden in plain sight, just as it has always been. It is an invitation to become someone transformed, not a better version of your old self, but a new creation entirely. The real danger was never in what they did not tell you. The real danger was in believing there was nothing more to discover. But you know better now. You know that there is more depth, more tension, and more truth. And most importantly, there is more of God than you were ever shown. Do not stop seeking simply because you have become curious. Let that curiosity lead you into the raw and unfiltered history of your own soul. Let it challenge your priorities and reshape your heart. Because when the surface cracks, the light finally gets in, and in that light, you will find everything you are looking for. True prosperity is the ability to stand in the truth without fear. It is the freedom to love your enemies and lay down your life for a cause greater than yourself. This is the message that survived against all odds, and it is the message that can change your life today if you let it. The journey does not end here, it only begins. If this message has stirred something deep within you, I invite you to join our community. We are a gathering of those who refuse to settle for a filtered version of reality. We are the seekers and believers who want the fire, not just the habit. Subscribe to the Upside Down Life and turn on the notification bell. We release deep dives like this regularly to help you navigate the complexities of faith, finance, and philosophy. Share this video with someone who is tired of the polished sermons and predictable answers. Let them know that they are not alone in their questions. Comment below and tell me which part of this history challenged you the most. I read every word because your journey matters to me. Thank you. Thank you for spending this hour with me. Thank you for having the courage to look at the hidden foundations. Keep seeking, keep asking, and keep walking toward the truth. The fire is waiting for you. I will see you in the next video as we continue to uncover what was never told. This is the Upside Down Life, where we lose our lives to find them. Goodbye for now, and may you find the peace that surpasses all understanding.